What was won today was fought in the streets to transform this industry in jobs that are dignified and that their humanity is respected. Organizing is the most essential right that we all human beings have, and is an opportunity to transform our lives. Hay una realidad. La policía, ni el gobierno, ni los restaurantes, ni las aplicaciones quieren hacerse responsables de la seguridad. Nadie. Last April, after more than 4,000 Deliveristas took the streets to demand essential protections, los Deliveristas Unidos have won 6 essential protections as workers. And that's a huge victory. It is possible to win essential protections. It is possible to humanize and dignify our work. And we have proven it again and again that organized people have power. Workers' Justice Project was founded in 2010, creating a safe space for workers to meet, to have a conversation about the issues that they're having, with the dream of having a better life. I feel very honored to be chosen as one of the Rising Leader Awards. Especially, this is a recognition to people like me who are immigrants, women of color, indigenous women, who understand that it is possible to change history.
I'm Sarah Watson, the director of the Murphy Institute here at CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies. And thank you all for joining us this morning with technical glitches and all, to have this wonderful conversation with Lydia Guapa, Executive Director of the Workers' Justice Project, one of the most effective worker centers, leading groundbreaking efforts to transform the future of 62,000 app-based delivery workers in New York City, setting a national example. She played a crucial role in building Los Deliveristas Unidos, one of the largest gig worker collectives in the country, which secured a landmark policy mandating food delivery apps in NYC to pay their delivery workers a minimum of $19.56 per hour, excluding tips. Lihia was also the 2022 recipient of the SLU Rising Leader Award, which is the video that we'll share. And unfortunately, due to the pandemic, the 2022 award ceremony was held virtually. So it's especially exciting to welcome Lihia to SLU today. Before we jump into the conversation, I want to acknowledge and thank the many teams at SLU who worked to make today's program possible, especially Michael, Nadia, and Rose from the public engagement team, and Aaron from the communications team, as well as our facilities and operations team, and IT. We'll have quite a bit of time today for audience questions and discussion. And there's 2 different ways you'll be able to share questions during the Q&A. We'll have a live mic, so just raise your hand if you have questions. And we also have half sheets of paper that I think have been passed around. So if you'd prefer to write a question, we'll also share those through our team. And one other exciting thing, we're especially fortunate today to have Gustavo Ache, who is the founder and leader of Los Deliveristas Unidos and a member of the Workers' Justice Project, with us. So Gustavo will join Lihia and I a little later in the program. I also want to note that at times during the conversation, you might hear me refer to the Workers' Justice Project as WJP or Los Deliveristas Unidos as LDU. Lihia, welcome.
Thank you.
It's such a pleasure to have the chance to talk with you today. And I wanted to open the conversation and ask you to share a little bit about your journey in becoming a grassroots labor organizer, and how the Workers' Justice Project developed and who its members are.
So I actually been organizing for more than, I would say, close to 15 years, actually. My organizing journey actually started at a worker center as a community-based organizer in Jackson Heights in Queens, actually, with a organization that no longer exists, but was one of a leading workers' right day labor organizing group that started kind of creating new ways for organizing low-wage industry workers who traditionally are not unionized, are operating in an on-the-ground economy without protections. And that's where I was introduced to the gig economy, particularly among day labor workers, in understanding what it really means to be a gig worker as an immigrant, undocumented, working in an industry that already lacks protections. And that's where my organizing journey started. And also understanding the complexity of organizing in industries that workers have few rights and few protections, that the system in itself hasn't been designed to protect them and has completely excluded. And that was 15 years ago. And then I think throughout that journey, I have been exposed to other industries that is not unique, impacting just day laborers, but impacted millions of other workers who are the backbone of our city's economy, but are excluded from basic labor protections. And since then, I think I've been exposed to different organizing models. That journey has led me to understanding different forms of organizing that exist, from building comités de jornaleros, day labor centers, worker cooperatives, to leading to figure out how we make industry-based changes. So here we are. I think continue to be committed to workers' rights organizing. A little bit of my own journey. I actually come from communities in a family that also is low-wage work. My mom and my dad didn't really have the privilege to be part of a union. My mom, actually, when she migrated to the U.S., she was actually working as a garment worker when the garment factories existed on 8th Avenue. And something interesting fact, when I was telling my mom, when I started organizing and visiting the day labor paradas, I'll tell the experience of a day labor to my mom and tell her how much I appreciate it. And she used to tell me, like, that's exactly how I used to look for work in the garment industry. She used to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning in the Bronx to get to 6 o'clock in the morning to Manhattan and wait outside for one of the factories to pick her up so she can go to work. And also my dad, who, funny story is that when I was telling them about my organizing journey, I told them that how I was visiting a parada in Jackson Heights, Queens, and my dad would say, like, oh yeah, when I got here, I used to wait for work there. So everything came to a full circle, right? Like, where spaces where I started organizing in industries that I started organizing were industries where became the first entry jobs for my dad and my mom, and continue to be the first entry jobs for millions of other workers who are, fighting and working for that American dream, which for many of us really means to be able to provide a better life to our families.
Thanks. Congratulations on securing the nation's first minimum wage for app-based delivery workers in NYC. I know this was, I know it was not an easy task and required disciplined organizing campaign and perseverance through numerous legal challenges waged by big tech app companies, including Uber, DoorDash, and Grubhub. And I'm wondering if you could take us through the organizing strategy that led to this groundbreaking industry reforms, and highlight a few of the greatest successes and biggest challenges of the campaign.
Yeah. So I want to give a big shout out. Thank you so much for the applause. But I think the real heroes and the people who made this movement happen are actually the Deliveristas. And a big shout out to the leaders who came today. I'm going to start with Gustavo, who's one of the founding leaders. Antonio, who's a Deliverista from Astoria. Also William Medina, who's one of the leaders here. And also Alejandro, who's right there. And then super excited too to introduce the new director of Los Deliveristas Unidos, Luis Cortez, who recently joined and is really excited about this campaign. They're the real people who have been on the ground, on the front lines, really being not only the leaders of and inspiring and motivating other workers, but have been the strategists, have been like the best communicators of how to lead the communication efforts, have been the best campaign builders on the ground. So a lot of our work and our strategy has been very thoughtfully designed by workers who have been sort of leading that front work. So just wanted to give them. So when we started organizing delivery workers, like most of our work is started in response. It was sort of like an emergency response effort to what workers were experiencing, and that happened in 2020. So when we started organizing, a lot of the workers was mostly to respond to their immediate issues. So when in the midst of the pandemic, when we started offering critical services, emergency relief services to our communities, we clearly came to understanding that it was Deliveristas who were those invisible workforce that nobody will talk about them, right? And even some of the leaders would say, and they will see nurses, everybody being recognized and uplifted right in the midst of the pandemic and giving them big shout outs and applauses. But it was Deliveristas who were out there risking their lives, making sure everybody gets their groceries, their food, when everybody had to stay in to stay safe. But nobody will talk about them until Los Deliveristas Unidos were born. And it was during that time that we started in talking about strategies, right? When we started bringing workers together, like most of our organizing efforts, we can only build a sense of urgency and sense of unity when we respond to the needs of workers. And we started gathering. We started a first survey that led to the report, the first report in the industry that it's called Essential but Unprotected, that we partner with Cornell. It was right in the midst of the pandemic that we started talking to hundreds of workers to better understand what were some of those issues. And the top issues that we came across, the number one was street safety. Every Deliverista talked about how unsafe this job was, not only because of COVID-19, which is infectious disease, one of the many that Deliveristas are exposed, but it was also because of the traffic injuries that many of them were exposed. So many of them have experienced getting hit by cars, because many of the roads and the streets are not designed for them. Other bike theft was one of the biggest issues. They have become the big target of e-bike robberies. They were easy targets, and also street crime. Many of them actually, some leaders have actually been killed in the street because of these injuries. So street safety was big. Other one, access to bathroom. It was funny because not many Deliveristas wanted to publicly talk about how uncomfortable they felt being in the street and not being able to access to bathrooms. Especially during COVID, most restaurants completely shut down access to bathrooms to anybody. So imagine being out there 6 to 12 hours an hour and not having access to a public bathroom. The other one was pay transparency. Many workers felt like they couldn't understand how they were being paid. Information was hidden from them, so they couldn't make decisions about which routes and which deliveries to take because of the information it was hidden. There's discrepancy about tipping as well. And the other one was paid transparency too, the fact that many deliveristas felt like they were not paid enough. Before minimum pay, we were talking that deliveristas were being paid by the company anything between $5 and $7 an hour, right? And anything else that they will make extra will be based on tips, which continues to be very inconsistent. And it's pretty much the generosity of every person. So going back to strategies, right, and our big successes. So after building a survey that led us to understand how the industry worked, we started immediately building a coalition of partners at City Council that were willing to take on these issues to try to set up some regulation. We were able and excited to build a first package of bills that led to the mandate of 6 legislations, some of them bringing critical changes into the industry, others that it was pretty much things that were overdue, like access to a bathroom, right? Like was sort of one of the human right things to do in the 21st century. And I think one of the biggest successes that we continue to we started enforcing this year was actually minimum pay rate. So that was huge. That's huge. And I'm going to explain why in a little bit, probably in the later part of the question. The biggest success is also being the first city in the country to start setting some labor protections in the industry that it's pretty much gig work. And the reason is huge is because it's an industry that is not regulated first. And the second one is that the federal government is still trying to figure out how these companies are operating under the gig economy in treating workers as independent contractors and really trying to define whether they're really independent contractors or they're really workers. And when we started setting up some labor protections at the city level, the intention was to start testing how far we can go on setting up some labor protections, but also understanding how we can do enforcement in a critical way. Because for the WJP, it's not just passing legislation and winning rights. These rights are meaningless if we can't really have government, we can have government effectively implement and enforce these legislations. So we're super proud. I think one of our biggest victories is to bring DCWP, a city agency, to work closely with us to design and figure out how we can collectively and together do the implementation of these laws. And that's so critical because this is the first year that we see, despite everything else that's going on at the city level, to see agencies super committed and super dedicated to figure out how implementation can be done effectively, and recognizing our power and recognizing that we bring the industry knowledge to help them design an effective way to do the implementation. So that's one of our victories. The other one that I think it's a small but progressive victory is that recently Los Deliveristas Unidos pushed the agency to release a statement of interest, granting for the Defer Action Program. For many of those that don't know what the program is, because of the incredible organizing of other groups at the national level, one of them giving a big recognition to the National Day Labor Organizing Network, they pushed the federal government to create a new immigration protections that is called Defer Action for Labor Enforcement that creates a pathway or guarantees immigration protections to any worker that has experienced labor protections. What that means that if you are a worker who has experienced wage theft or any other labor violations, and if you have filed a claim, you can get the agency to issue a statement of interest for the worker to be able to apply for this program. And what the program guarantees is work authorization for 4 years and to have the protection not to be deported during that time. And that's huge for a couple of reasons. One is it creates a pathway for work authorization for workers that do not have any pathway and who have been working here for decades. Second, it protects them for possible retaliation and threats of deportation which is what employers are using to create fear and to make sure that workers do not come forward. And one of the successes is forcing the agency, not forcing, but pushing them to issue the first statement of interest for gig workers, for DoorDash workers. And this is huge because it will be the first case in the country. And we're super excited to see Deliveristas go through that process because that will open the door for thousands of other workers as well to get protections. Yeah, and I'm going to stop there, and I'm sure, yeah.
I think we're going to talk a bit more about sort of the organizing campaign and where things are now since some of these reforms have gone through when we invite Gustavo to join us. But I have a couple sort of longer term kind of questions that I wanted to ask you about before we shift back to more of the granular of what's happening right now on the ground. I wanted to shift towards health and safety, and I wanted to ask you about the Workers' Justice Project 2023 annual report titled Delivering Justice, a Workers' Justice-Centered Vision for Street Safety. And in that report, you share a vision for a new city department, the Department of Sustainable Delivery. And I was wondering if you could walk us through what the function of this department would be and how it would support infrastructure development and strengthen health and safety for app-based delivery workers, but for the city at large.
Yeah, and I just want to start, I think we need to recognize the uniqueness of New York City. The reason app delivery work has become sort of so profitable and convenient and sort of a new emerging market for app delivery companies, it's because, not only because we're a great city, but also because 70%, according to even the CWP report, 77% out of the 62,000 or 65,000 app delivery workers do this work in e-bikes or bikes or mopeds. And that has made it easy for any worker to do this job, right? To get into the industry. But also has been very convenient for app delivery companies who can rely on 62,000 delivery workers that can move across the city, move goods, move anything that can be moved on a bike. While this economy continues to emerge, because as the report has indicated, since the minimum pay implementation, actually the delivery industry is growing and actually grew by 8% and is expanding. So all these companies who are testing and are growing this industry in New York City by trying to deliver anything. And I'm just going to give things that Deliveristas deliver. It's not just food. It's groceries, is alcohol. Recently, we have heard deliveries even delivering laundry, so they'll pick up your laundry. Pharmacy. Recently, we heard that there's deliveries even delivering wheat to those New Yorkers who now legally consume wheat. So anything, right? So these industries are expanding, and recently have seen also how these companies are merging, or how these companies are looking to partner with new industries to expand what can be delivered online in the online economy. But that has created not only labor issues, and going back to your question, that has created other issues, what we called one of the biggest things, which is an infrastructure crisis. I know the city wants to label it as a street safety, but we call it also infrastructure crisis. And the reason for that is because New York City was never designed for people to walk. The streets of New York was never designed for people to walk, nor for people to bike. It's purely designed for cars, and that's the reality, right? And so we have 77% of those 62,000 riding on e-bikes. And the biggest issues that deliveristas are experiencing is that while they're trying and attempting to deliver you food, they don't have a place to park the bike. They don't have a place where they can charge their e-batteries. They don't have a place where they can ride, or those few e-bike lanes that are existing are not protected there's no protected bike lane, so they're still exposed to hazards and street safety issues. So with the development of this, with this new agency, our goal has been how we can push the city to invest in developing new type of infrastructures. And the idea is that we totally agree that it shouldn't be paid by public funding. It shouldn't be taxpayers paying for this infrastructure. It should be the companies. They're the ones who are profiting from not only the labor of delivery workers, but by the current infrastructure that exists in the city of New York. So our goal, which is, I know, this is a conflicting issue we're having with the administration, right? Because the administration wants to create this new agency with the idea to regulate, and their initial idea was to regulate the companies by regulating workers. And our push has been, let's regulate industries. The industry needs to be regulated. And our idea with this Department of Sustainability is forcing the companies to release critical information that can inform city planning processes in terms of where e-bike lanes need to be developed, to figure out where possibly e-bike parking needs to be developed, e-bike charging stations. And the second one is creating a system or a mechanism for the companies to pay for it. And there is ways, and we strongly believe that if the companies are not enforcing the minimum pay laws and all these agencies, we should find a way for the companies to pay fines, to put money, to create a fund that can lead to effort of developing new type of infrastructure. So the way we're seeing this new agency is a way to enforce the agency so they can release critical information, possibly force the companies to invest money into a fund that can allow the creation of new infrastructure around the city. And also this agency to create new mechanisms to enforce and push the companies to be in compliance with the current labor protections, and also support our ongoing efforts to expand more labor protections that are still needed in the industry to ensure workers can do this work more safely.
Great. One other question, given we're a school of labor and there's a lot of talk about unions all the time here. During the registration for the event, we asked folks to share questions they may have going into the program. And this is a question that was raised by a couple different people in different ways in the registration. And that question is the idea of working towards creating a union for delivery workers. And I'll share one specific question that comes from Patricia Campos Medina, Executive Director of the Worker Institute at Cornell University. And she asks, what is the path to having a union that can sign a collective bargaining agreement? And how can labor education centers like the Workers Institute help?
Yeah, so that's the goal. And I know Gustavo is going to probably share more. Part of the vision of Los Deliveristas Unidos has been creating a union. And some of them have said, we might not be recognized as a union yet, but they're operating as a union because they already secured a minimum pay that has brought $16 million per week more than what Deliveristas were making before. They have pushed a lot of these companies to make some business industry changes that has significantly pushed workers to have more protections. Like, for instance, before we passed these legislations, Deliveristas didn't have the right to decide and have full control of how far they want to travel for these deliveries. And they brought that new labor protection. So Los Deliveristas Unidos have been already operating as a union by raising the minimum wage from $7 to $15, pushing the companies to create, to give more rights to the workers and to decide how far they want to travel, to release information that was not accessible to workers. And the goal continues to make sure that we push the companies to do what they need to do. And the goal it is to formalize that relationship. And I think the biggest hurdle is that because the Deliveristas are considered independent contractors, they don't necessarily have the ability to unionize because they don't have bargaining rights. And the goal it is to secure those bargaining rights at the state level. And we will get there. But we know that that's not an effort that is going to happen and next year. It's going to take a long campaign because we know that the company has the intention of, and actually had tried to pass a legislation that will guarantee union rights, but under the company's terms. And what Los Deliveristas have been fighting, saying, yeah, we want bargaining rights, but not on the company's terms, in our terms. We want to be able to still exercise basic workers' rights, and one of them being the right to strike. So the last year's, actually 22, there is a legislation at the state level, and I think this is why we need educators and even partners to really understand and ensure that because a lot of these companies want to avoid that labor protections like the ones we created at the city level, are expanded across the country, and they want to be able to have full control and make sure that workers' rights are very limited. And when we are going back to the state to fight for bargaining rights, we want to make sure that that legislation is written in a way that allows and gives strong protections and bargaining rights to workers. And I'm just going to be open and share. And our biggest concern is that we know that these companies want to be able to control not only the narrative, but what goes in every piece of legislation. And what we want to make sure is that people I think the best allies here, especially on this multi-billion-dollar campaign that the companies are running against us, is that people are informed, that people truly understand and can ensure that when legislation is being drafted, that workers are at the table, not only negotiating, but deciding what language needs to go in every legislation. And right now, our biggest partners have been educators, have been community organizations in the front lines who have stood with us, progressive council members and elected officials. And I know we have somebody from Jumani's office as well who has been one of our strongest partners, and other elected officials who understand that when workers, that understand that workers are the ones who need to decide their future. And there are no better strategies than a worker to decide what language and what legislation needs to be written at the state level. So we will get there, but I think a lot of us have been about how we build that process in a way that workers are full control on a state level legislative effort.
Great. And I think let's welcome Gustavo to join us, and we can also have him weigh in on this union question. Thanks for joining us. And Gustavo, I don't know if you have more you'd like to add to the question around the forming a union, sort of the long-term goals of Los Deliveristas Unidos.
Well, okay, I'm going to be speaking Spanish, but para lo de la unión que están hablando, ese es uno de nuestros sueños, tener nuestro propio sindicato, nuestra propia unión, aunque nos movemos ya como un sindicato, pero las condiciones, por el simple hecho de que nos han contratado como independientes, esa es una de las barreras que nos ha impedido avanzar a ese punto, pero estamos a ese camino. Yo sé que nada es imposible, todo se logra.
So just reinforcing what it was said, like that has been one of our dreams And we know that one of our biggest challenges, it's actually what I had mentioned is having the ability to unionize and have the ability to bargain, which limits us because we are now independent contractors.
So, ese es uno de nuestros grandes sueños y pues ya que por mucho tiempo la industria del reparto de comida en la ciudad de Nueva York no había sido reconocida. Hasta hoy día es que hemos tomado ya nuestro espacio, como dijo Lige al principio, por muchos años. Yo trabajo desde el 2004 haciendo el reparto acá en Nueva York y he visto cómo antes era el trabajador de reparto no era reconocido. En lo personal habían tormentas grandísimas de nieve en el 2010, 2009. Muchas veces me tocaba ir a mi casa caminando de acá de Manhattan hasta Brooklyn, llegar a la casa 2, 3 de la mañana y al siguiente día sí salía en la noticia, pero decía, hey, gracias a los de Sanitation, a los Fire Departments que hicieron un trabajo excepcional anoche, y nunca se habla del repartidor que llevaba pizza en la nieve a puras penas llegando a la casa del consumidor, pero ahí estábamos, éramos invisibles, pero existíamos.
So as it was mentioned, like nobody will recognize us before. And I just a personal story. I started doing this job like long time ago, like since 2004. And I remember one time in a winter time, in a rainy day, actually in 2009 or 10, when I used to deliver really late at night when it was super rainy and it was in a heavy snow, actually. I used to deliver, and sometimes there wouldn't be public transportation. And I remember one day actually having to walk all the way from Manhattan, all the way down to South Brooklyn and Bensonhurst, right? Because of the lack of transportation and doing hard work, right? To like support New York. And I used to get up in the morning next day and see how everybody was giving a big shout out to like the people of sanitation, to the fire department. Everybody was being recognized, and we were invisible, right? Until we started organizing.
No, las cosas fueron cambiando y en el 2020, durante la pandemia, empezamos a organizar a los trabajadores, pero yo aprendí mucho estando ayudando a mis compañeros, a gente en las esquinas como day laborers, a ir a exigir salarios no pagados, ir a promocionar el centro a las iglesias. Mi inglés estaba mal, pero nos decían, lean en inglés, yo sé que los van a entender. Íbamos a las misas en italiano, nos metíamos a hablar, nos decían, ahí están los contratistas, pero todo fue a ese proceso donde uno aprendió. Yo aprendí que nuestra comunidad tenía el miedo de hablar y bueno, yo fui perdiendo el miedo conforme el paso del tiempo.
So I started organizing in 2020, but actually, like me and many others, like we have been organizing for years. I actually started back in 2009 organizing day laborers because I was also a day laborer, and going into spaces to win support. And I remember sometimes even going to a service, a religious service in Italian, and just being there just so we can talk to potential employers. Yeah.
So, las cosas fueron cambiando y pues en el 2020 empezamos a organizar a los trabajadores poco a poco. Durante la pandemia yo le comentaba a Ligia de que hay una fuerza laboral ahí fuerte, pero la organización Worker Justice estaba enfocada en lo que es en la construcción y el entrenamiento a los trabajadores de construcción y también a las trabajadoras de domestic cleaning. Y nada, fue increíble que nuestra primera marcha en el 2020, el 15 de octubre de 2020, lo organizamos en una semana haciendo alcances casi todos los días en la calle, y fue increíble para mí ver esa marcha que asistieron como 800 personas y yo pensaba que iban a llegar unos 20, 30, pero la respuesta de la comunidad fue grande.
So when we started organizing, I actually started engaging the organization so we can organize this workforce. And I still remember, like, when we started organizing, the first march that we organized to make these demands, we organized it in less than a week, seeing more than 800 people, Deliveristas, show up to our first rally.
So fue increíble, y ahí fue cuando llamamos también la atención de muchos medios y ahí surgió nuestro nombre como los Deliveristas Unidos. No teníamos un nombre en la primera marcha y captamos la atención de muchos medios de comunicación y empezaron a llamarnos y mucha de nuestra gente, los compañeros que empezaron a organizar con nosotros, no tenían el miedo a hablar en un micrófono, no tenían el miedo de me puede pasar algo, porque es el miedo que mucha gente le pone a uno. Hey, eres inmigrante, no tienes derecho. Hey, eres inmigrante, no puedes hablar, no digas esto, no hagas lo otro. Pero eso es falso. Nosotros tenemos derecho donde sea, como sea.
So that's when we started organizing, and Los Deliveristas Unidos was born. And you know, a lot of workers still, and back then, had a lot of fear because a lot of employers and other people create fear by saying, like, you know, you're undocumented, you're immigrant, you don't have rights, and which, you know, creates fear from people really coming forward.
Thank you. And a little earlier, we spoke about the campaign. And Gustavo, since the new wage went into effect in late 2023 and the other reforms, how have things changed for app-based delivery workers?
Los cambios son notorios, pero lastimosamente como estamos luchando con corporaciones que mueven mucho dinero, siempre tratan la manera de evadir muchas leyes y responsabilidades, pero seguimos luchando para que ellos cumplan la ley como lo dice. No, los cambios son fuertes. Las compañías ahora están pagando más dinero a los trabajadores, muchos trabajadores, pero como siempre lo hemos dicho, las compañías usan un algoritmo siempre a favor de ellos y siempre oprimiendo al trabajador, pero seguimos desafiándonos, seguimos luchando y fuertemente con la ciudad de Nueva York seguimos, quizás si no nos hacen caso hablando con nosotros, estamos tratando también de manejarlos a través de legislaciones para que es la única manera de poder hacerlos seguir reglas, ya que estas corporaciones, si uno se deja, ellos manipulan y siguen exprimiendo a la gente para poder seguir ellos haciendo más y más, y el trabajador se queda con una miseria a veces.
So there's been big changes in the industry, but those changes, which are huge and are impactful among workers, but something we have seen is like also these companies try to fight back and try to create a negative impact in the industry. I'm just going to expand on those changes. So I mentioned that the workers were making anything between like $5 to $7 an hour plus tips. Now, because of the minimum pay standard, workers are mandated to pay $19.52. That's like more than probably like 200% more than what workers were making. The other one is that a deliverista, in order to earn $100 or $200 a day, had to work anything between 7 o'clock in the morning all the way to 9, working 13, 14 hours at work. And sometimes it doesn't necessarily mean that they were guaranteed work. It meant like you had to be connected longer hours and be available to the company. And you weren't really paid by the time that you were waiting. Now we do, the current minimum pay mandates the company to either pay workers what we call on-call time, which is huge, right? Because back then workers weren't really guaranteed. And if the company doesn't, which this is part of the challenges and part of the things that we don't like, is created flexibility to choose the company to have alternative method of payment if they don't want to choose to, if they choose not to pay the on-call time, the companies can pay a higher rate, which is close to $30 an hour for the hours of work. So that's huge. It also mandates the company to be transparent with workers about whether they really have work, right? So the companies have been used to having a whole army of workers to their disposal for longer periods of time. But because now the minimum pay mandates that they have to pay, and one of the methods mandates the on-call time of the waiting time, now companies are being transparent with workers about how many hours they can really give to the worker. and workers can make better financial decisions about how many hours per day and per week they really want to work with the company. So those are huge changes, and also pay transparency, forcing the company to disclose more information that wasn't available. And one of them is being able the company to release tips that they were hiding, or they were only allowing to see when the trip was ending. And there is more, but I think there's much more to do. And I know there is a question about it. And despite this progress that was made, the companies have retaliated. One of them is removing the tip, which has significantly hurt thousands of workers, especially during the slow season or the low season, which is the summer. The other one has been deactivations or lockouts, which means because now the companies have to pay the on-call time or the time that workers are waiting, they have decided to deactivate workers or pause workers, reducing and they have only, and they intentionally do it, and this is crazy, right? The company, especially DoorDash now, it's organizing their town halls across the city and trying to get elected officials to believe that the reason they have to do this lockout or deactivations is because of the minimum pay. They're saying, we cannot offer enough hours of work because now we are paying a higher rate, and and not many people are ordering food, so there's less jobs because of this minimum pay fee. So that is false. The reason they're implementing these lockouts is to reduce the hours of on-call time, because now the company has to pay the amount of hours workers are connected. What they're trying to do is reduce and make it seem as if the worker has only spent 3-4 hours on the app, rather than disclosing that the worker actually is spending more hours. So, and the biggest issue is that they're doing that at any time of the day or any time in the week, and the worker doesn't really have an informed decision or control as why this is happening. And also the activations are intentionally happen, not necessarily linked to the market. It's more necessarily linked to the worker's performance. So for instance, if a worker decides to let's say decline many orders because he finds these orders to be far away, that can lead to potential deactivation, right? Through a penalizing system. Or if a worker decides that they cannot deliver in the set time by the company, that can affect their rating, and their rating can they can lead to possible deactivations. So the lack of transparency, so the fact that we still have a long fight to go means that there is much more to do, and that these companies are not going to stop and are going to create new systems in a way that they can still take advantage and profit from the labor of workers. And this is what we're fighting for, making sure workers have the ability to have more protections.
Well, I guess with that and with the retaliatory approach from these companies, which unfortunately is not surprising to us in the way that they operate, has it changed or has it impacted the organizing strategies moving forward in this work for you all?
¿Quieres hablar de las protecciones? So, yes. So one thing that we are, so just to give example, obviously, yes, it has impacted it has made us think about what is our approach now going forward. And I think we're trying in an effort not to be responsive to the company's effort and have the company lead to impact the strategy that we have. We are exploring and we're thinking about a multi-strategy effort, one that is a legal strategy, how we can build more cases against the company. One of them, identifying strong partners at the city and state level that are willing to take a legal strategy. And that the other one is research. The fact that these companies have access to all data, something that we're developing internally is how we can have access and develop access to data that can better informed our legislative efforts. And the other one is building a strong partnerships and educating elected officials about what's really happening on the industry. And that has been part of our significant goal, is like one-on-one building these efforts to make sure elected officials truly understand what's happening in industry, truly understand what are the working conditions and how these companies are operating. And the other one, it has been communication. Actually, WJP's is a small and mighty worker center. We have never in our history of our organization had a communication director or a communication staff. And during this campaign, we actually ended up hiring somebody fully dedicated to like communication because we noticed that these companies are investing millions of dollars on designing how people get to understand how the industry operates. Also, being smart about how we can build strategies on the ground to rebuild the trust with workers. Talking about the biggest challenges that I didn't get answered in the first question was, our biggest challenge continues to be that the fact that these companies have a lot of political power in the city and nobody talks about it. And the fact that Uber is very close to the mayor and actually have strong advisors protecting the company's industries, nobody talks about that. The fact that we have DoorDash investing in political campaigns across city council races, nobody talks about it. The fact that now they are hosting private town halls and roundtables across the city, inviting elected officials to be part of those conversations, right? Which obviously it's one of our biggest challenges, right? Because we don't have that leverage and the money to buy elected officials, right? By putting money into and fueling money into their campaigns. So that's been one of our biggest challenges. And the other one is communication. DoorDash recently hired a ethnic media communication person that is super targeting on creating ethnic media communication, so they can control what gets to communicated to workers. They get control about what gets to talk and gets covered on ethnic media. And that has been one of our biggest challenges because we don't have those millions of dollars to build a strong communication department that can take control of on what gets to talk on ethnic media. And then the other one is access to data. The fact that workers don't get access to enough information has been one of our biggest challenges on building a strong legal cases against the company. And those are some of the challenges that we're currently in trying to figure out how we address by building different strategies internally.
Great. I think we have a number of questions coming from the audience, and I'm looking at time. So I think we'll move to some of the audience questions.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to hand this to my colleague, Rosa, in a second. But just to remind you, we've been collecting questions on these sheets from folks. Please continue to give those to us. If you'd like to ask your question yourself, right after this, we're going to pass around a roving mic so you can ask your question if you haven't submitted it already. And then we have a bunch of questions submitted during the registration process as backup. So there's a lot of questions for you guys. So thanks for bearing with us.
Ligia, there's two, and Gustavo, there's two. I'll just give you two questions in a row, and then you can tackle them. The first one is, do you find that there are linguistic challenges in organizing folks beyond English and Spanish? What kinds of support do you need to bridge language barriers for other communities doing gig work in such a diverse city? And this question came to us from Karen Ortiz. And then we had a question from Fatma. Are delivery workers being targeted in marketing that promises to give you fast pay in exchange for tips and fees? If so, what are those experiences with these types of products? So those are, and that question came in from Fatma. The first one was from Karen.
Ok, sobre lo que es las barreras de idioma, ha sido un gran reto eso para nosotros, pero hemos logrado, gracias a nuestros aliados, siempre hemos logrado conectarnos con otras comunidades, como la fuerza laboral también de los de delivery acá en la ciudad de Nueva York. La más fuerte es la latina, luego siguen los bangladeshes y luego los asiáticos y hay otras minorías, pero seguimos avanzando y africanos también, pero seguimos luchando. Creo que es bueno tener este tipo de eventos para poder conectarnos y quizás conseguir gente nueva que nos sigan ayudando para poder seguir ampliando nuestro campo de trabajo, ya que la barrera de idioma acá en la ciudad de Nueva York es un poco complicada y eso hemos siempre tratado de hacer, alcanzar a más gente, luchar con más gente. Ya creo que la ciudad de Nueva York es una gran diversidad de idiomas y culturas y como Deliveristas Unidos representamos a toda la fuerza laboral de diferentes nacionalidades.
So, yeah, so, the delivery workforce is huge and very diverse. Obviously, the largest is the Latina workforce, but then it goes the South Asian, particularly workers from Bangladesh, the East Asian, and the West African communities. And the way we have been doing is building community partnerships with local organizations that have access to these communities that we can work together. And obviously, coming to these events also help us build more partnerships and allies that can really help us connect with those communities that we're continuously connecting with every day. And also, I have to say, one of the things we're also doing is we're looking into hiring our first West African organizer. So we're super excited. And part of our strategy has been how we can create opportunities for deliveristas actually to merge as organizers, since they're like really, they're the people who know better what's happening on the industry and in the streets.
And the second question about being targeted? The second question was being targeted for marketing that promises to, give up your tips and fees in exchange for fast pay.
Yeah. I mean, if you haven't seen it, actually the companies have different strategies. One is they have big $1 million campaigns saying like this is a job where you can become your own boss and have full control of your flexibility. They're also I think they stopped now, but back then they used to say like they'll used to give you a coupon or a gift card if you referred a friend, and that used to be part of like their marketing strategy, like having referrals from own deliveristas to recruit workers. And they're also sending messages when they get access to data and information, about how you can easily get on the job, sign up, and just get on and do this gig work. And what is interesting is that when they do these town halls across the city, they will say to elected officials, we can really hire more workers because of the minimum pay. Now there is a hiring freeze, like we can't recruit more workers. While they say that, they're ongoing, right, on the ground, running a campaign and actively recruiting workers to get on board. And part of the strategy is still recruiting a large workforce that they can still have to their disposal while deactivating thousands of others who probably are trying to survive and are getting retaliated because of their unfair retaliatory practices.
Ligia, Gustavo, there's another question that was submitted online by Hillary Silver, who's a member of the faculty at Georgetown University. She wants to know, do you have other connections, campaigns, solidarity actions with other gig workers or other logistics workers? And I'll just add that in the past 2 years, we've had leaders of logistic workers, Chris Smalls from the Amazon Labor Union, Sean O'Brien from the Teamsters last year. And so logistics workers are making big moves, and you all kind of fall into that. So that's the question. What are you doing in connection and solidarity with other gig workers and other logistics workers?
So one of the organizations that we're working very close and supporting each other in discussing a strategy has been definitely the Taxi Workers Alliance, who now have a big organizing, who has been an inspiration, who actually have been organizing against these other, companies such as Uber and Lyft for decades. Not recently, but we're talking about them because they're right now also working on legislative efforts to pass deactivation protections. So we've been discussing with them about language, right? Like what's happening around the industry, understanding as well how we can design better, effective strategies to push back around, again, these companies. The other one is we also, we're also talking to other organizations across the state. And working in Washington has been an organization that we admire and have a lot of similarities because they pass legislation also at the city level to establishing a minimum pay rate in Seattle, setting up the activation protections. Actually, they have probably the strongest language offering deactivation and additional protections to workers that we're looking that I think they're starting enforcement in the new year. So we're trying to learn as well and build solidarity. And then we're also talking to other community groups, right, on the ground to try to we have worked very closely with DRUM, which is another worker center that we have deep admiration and respect as well. We're building, I think, alliances with community boards as well. And part of our work is how we can continue to build solidarities with other workers who are either working in the gig economy or in a way or other interact with these industries that are expanding and operating.
This question came to us from Angela Soto. What steps this relates to healthcare for workers. What steps can we take to build on this momentum and the current wins and link with other systems like healthcare access for los deliveristas and other gig workers now?
Yeah, so healthcare is definitely one of the biggest challenges that exists in the industry because as independent contractors, you'll probably know, they don't have access to healthcare and the company doesn't have to offer healthcare options because they're gig workers. So something we have been on the ground is trying to figure out how we can enroll and expand the ability for many of these programs that actually exist, like Care NYC, to make sure that it's also accessible and workers like Deliveristas get enrolled. But also we're trying to figure it out internally, how we can build a system where companies pay for it too. So part of our exploratory effort in the future is how we can create a portable benefit option for the companies to contribute or entirely paid, especially when a worker gets an accident and that company is responsible. Since many of the deaths that workers experience are caused by the algorithms and the company's practices.
Great. I'm going to ask a question, and after this, I want to encourage folks to raise their hands if you have questions, and we'd like you to ask your questions as well yourselves. This is a combination of many people kind of asked this question, so I'm combining Austin, Dilly, and others, and they want to know to overcome these struggles of organizing a non-site specific labor force. And you've talked about all the challenges, language, geography, everything. Is there a way for consumers, customers, people who interact with delivery drivers to do more, including do, communications and outreach on behalf of LDU and WJP?
Pues en los últimos meses lo que hemos venido logrando también es tener comunicación y queremos también seguir incentivando al consumidor a que sea solidario también y que tenga paciencia, a que a veces la comida no llega a su tiempo que el consumidor quisiera, pero a la vez no todo es porque el trabajador esté lento en la calle, pero también hay que pensar en la seguridad del trabajador y he notado muchas veces que hay consumidores de que quizás ya tienen hambre, algo así, y le dan un rating bajísimo al trabajador. Entonces creo que el consumidor, le decimos al consumidor que tenga más conciencia y también que sea generoso y también que siempre dé un rating bueno al trabajador para que eso incentive al trabajador a que tenga un mejor, al final del día su rating sea algo bueno y también eso le ayuda ya que hemos logrado muchas cosas y como les digo, las compañías buscan manera de cómo seguir presionando al trabajador en la calle. Entonces, el rating es un buen incentivo, ¿no? Porque el trabajador siga generando, recibiendo más entregas y al final del día se vaya satisfecho a su casa.
Yes. So I think we have an effort to make sure that consumers can also become part of this campaign. One of them is ensuring consumers really understand. One is understanding what the importance of tips and how they can become and be in solidarity with workers and generous as well. The second one is for them to also have patience. Most consumers don't understand what it really takes to make that delivery, right? And sometimes they may give a negative rating because of any issues that they might be experiencing, but many of them what do not know is that that negative rating can impact their ability for workers to continue to work on the platform. And I just wanted to add also, we have a campaign that is called Delivering Justice campaign for consumers. What I think a lot of these companies do not want is for consumers to get organized too. And that is the biggest threat to the companies. And I think there is a huge amount of power that consumers have. And we want to be able to leverage that power because these companies are not going to be able to operate and grow if consumers are an easy target and are not informed. And just example of that, DoorDash, like last year made $9 billion. $9 billion, right? $9 billion. And majority of that money was invested back in marketing. Millions of dollars of marketing, right? And you probably will see how these companies are so devoted to consumers. They want to be able to make sure that they control the message and they are in your face. They're investing not only on TV ads, they're also partnering with huge corporate partners to make sure that they are visible and they're seen, their product is seen. And part of our effort is to make sure that consumers can use their consumer power to force the companies to be more transparent. And one of the things that consumers should know and should get involved is because every time you order your food, you're probably going to see a number of fees added in your receipt. But what the company do not disclose is what those extra fees are added into. And actually, even Senator Warren has issued a letter forcing the company to disclose more information about those predatory fees that they get to add. And consumers have the right to that information, should get involved as well in the organizing effort. We're looking for exciting community members as consumers that want to lead the campaign, want to be able to build a strong communication effort. We strongly believe that consumers should get organized because because the companies even have said, that if there's more fees that they feel like they want to add, they're going to add it on consumers. And workers are organizing to make sure workers get paid. I know the restaurants are also organizing to make sure extra fees are not added to the companies. And I think consumers should do the same, right? Because these companies are trying to profit, not only from restaurants and workers, but also from consumers and not have to be transparent. So there needs to be consumer rights in this industry. And I think there's a huge opportunity to organize a community that I know, especially in New York, we're usually not quiet when there is an issue. We will stand up and we'll fight back.
Question? Go back to me around.
Yeah, so you spoke about how the deliveristas are labeled as gig workers and independent contractors in order to exclude... Okay, should I restart my question? Okay, so it's been mentioned that the deliveristas have been labeled as, or like legally, as gig workers and independent contractors. And that's really a way for these companies to not recognize their workers as their workers or exclude them from labor laws And that's pretty sneaky of like the capitalist class. But it has been a positive development because now like workers are starting to fight on a political level. And so, sorry, I wrote a bunch of notes in that one, like getting lost in them. And also a lot of these politicians are somewhat unreliable. And there is like a lot of distrust amongst immigrants. So has there been any talk about forming a labor party so that like you can unite like a lot of workers across different sections and really advance these political demands?
Yeah, good question. I think, well, as Los Deliveristas, I have to say, when we started organizing app delivery workers, and we have been more politically active because it's an industry where there's lax labor protection, right? Entirely as you mentioned. So there is a need to create regulation. And right now, the people who can create regulatory efforts, it's really city council and elected officials who have a huge amount of power. And part of our efforts, I think, and we're very new in terms of how navigating to create and to educate elected officials. So we haven't really explored and had a conversation about building like a workers' party, right, in New York, because we strongly believe that New York has, I think, especially now at City Council, we have seen a new wave of progressive City Council, particularly women that come from communities where most of us belong and we belong. We also, I think, have seen a wave of progressive elected officials who want to be on the right side of history. And by saying that, I'm not saying like, we are in a perfect place, right? We still have to do our effort. I think where are we focused is making sure our communities can vote and those voters that vote can be more informed about who they vote for. So part of our conversation and as part of like our consumer justice campaign effort is making sure that we're communities who vote and have the power to vote are informed about, what are the workers' issues that not just impacts workers, but it impacts everybody in the community. And we're noticing more and more as we go into neighborhoods, right? In every neighborhood, I know every neighbor complains about bikes. And every time they reach out to us, they said, hey, Deliveristas, there is a bike issue in my neighborhood. How can you come and resolve it? And what those communities don't know is not a bike issue. It's not a Deliverista issue, right? It's an infrastructure issue. It's a workers' rights issue. And the people who have the power to decide in your neighborhood, it's not Los Deliveristas Unidos, it's your city council member, right? The way your city council member prioritizes legislation, the way your city council votes in certain decisions impacts the life of every neighbor. So our goal, I think, in this coming year has been to devote a lot of efforts to build engagement at the community level to make sure that community board members understand how the industry operates, but what power they have as voters and what power elected officials have and how we can force city council members to really prioritize legislative efforts that will protect workers and will make the community better and safer. And one of our biggest challenges actually is informing elected officials, right? We know that there is a good possibility because this city council is new, is fresh. We're seeing progressive, but it all depends on how informed they are, how involved their constituency can be on pushing elected officials to be on the right side of history. And we are probably one of the most progressive city councils across the country. And we see potential and possibility that we as communities should build up, right? And push city council to do the right thing. And despite what's happening at the administration level, we strongly have faith that, you know, our organizing will create results. But workers cannot do it alone. We're going to depend on our neighbors. We're going to depend on consumers. We're going to depend on academics to also be able to tell the truth and educate the community about what's really happening in the industry in our communities.
Hi, I just wanted to ask that besides legislative battles, has the Workers' Justice Project been able to use direct actions to force concessions directly from the big tech giants or other employers, or is that structurally too difficult right now?
Yeah, good question. We're building it up towards there. One of the things that we are doing right now is building up cases. I can talk more about those cases that we're building up, that we can get there. Direct action has a lot of power, and we have come to understand that direct actions can have the effect that we want if we have strong partnerships and strong cases and strong demands. And right now, one of our priorities has been about how we can make sure that these laws are enforceable, making sure that the agency is responsive to these claims. And the other one is organizing workers on the streets so they can come forward. And we have seen how these companies continues to create fear and threats in the industry by creating fear, by disseminating misinformation, by actually eluding that by raising minimum pay really has put them out of a job. So one of our biggest priorities is making sure workers understand. And because New York City has one of the most diverse workforce, which has a lot of power, also means how we can make sure that a diverse community of workers are engaged in the organizing effort. And that takes time, that takes resources, that takes human power to make sure that we build on that organizing effort. So we're right now, I think, doing one of the hardest jobs, right? Which is making sure that we can be having those deep conversations with workers one-on-one and building those relationships and building small cases. And yeah, so I don't know if that answered your question.
Hi, so you've talked about how street safety and the infrastructure crisis was really the number one issue you found in that first survey. And I know you've been involved in launching some of the new infrastructure like the hubs and the charging infrastructure pilot. So I'm curious to hear from you and maybe Gustavo on how workers' experience on the street has changed since that infrastructure has been implemented and what additional infrastructure is needed.
Bueno, en los últimos años en la ciudad de Nueva York creo que sí se han visto la implementación de líneas verdes para bicicletas, pero no son suficientes. Hay lugares donde necesita ser protegidas aún y también, como decías, de los hubs, durante la pandemia fue un momento bien crítico para nosotros los repartidores de no tener un techo o un lugar donde ir a descansar, donde ir a cargar el teléfono. Entonces fue por eso que también empezamos con la idea de los Deliveristas Hubs. Son los Deliveristas Hubs, esperemos que pronto esté en función el primero, y eso es uno de nuestros sueños, ¿no? Estar en la ciudad, seguir educando a los trabajadores y seguir luchando también, ¿no? Para que más líneas de bicicletas sean protegidas y sean seguras, no solo para el trabajador, sino que también para el neoyorquino. Y también creo que en cuestión de educación tenemos mucho más que hacer en educar no solo al trabajador, sino que a todos, porque muchas veces los peatones también se desenfocan, no ven su camino, y si pasa algo, el problema es el delibrista. Entonces, hay muchas cosas que hay que seguir trabajando y es un proceso largo. Hay programas ahora, creo yo, de cambios de baterías y todo, pero creo que para mí hay mucho más por hacer, no son suficientes aún. Estamos hablando de 65,000 o 60,000 trabajadores que usan estas bicicletas todos los días. Entonces necesitamos más cargas para las baterías y necesitamos más programas. Creo que hay uno que está manejando DOT ahorita, pero para mí creo que no es suficiente. Tenemos que seguir luchando para alcanzar a toda la fuerza laboral de delivery workers en toda la ciudad.
So yeah, so we have, in terms of infrastructure, we have seen some progress. So some of them is expansion of bike lanes on key areas where there's a high density of deliveries. We also have seen, we have been developing the Deliverista hubs, which has taken us a long way to get there as well. And the other one is the New York City DOT that started piloting e-bike charging stations. But all these efforts are small efforts that are happening at the city level. And there's much more that needs to happen, especially because, you know, there are like probably 65,000 app delivery workers doing this job and riding in the streets.
Hi, Pamela Vasanes, Good Food Jobs program at the CUNY Urban Food Policy Institute. You mentioned like death by algorithm, and I was wondering if you could just elaborate a little bit to just put a real human face on what it means, algorithm-based jobs.
Oh, somebody else had a question? Oh, that was it. Yeah, so I think it's important. I think everybody knows, and maybe this is an opportunity for one of the deliveristas to talk who have been doing this work. The companies have designed a system that is controlled by an algorithm, right? That it is a computer who decides where the food is picked up, where the food is dropped. The algorithm decides already does automatically the timing, decides for the worker how long that ride should take. The algorithm decides how many orders you get, right, in your zone. The algorithm decides all these factors that does impact workers' rights. And for a worker who's on the street every day, it's about survival. And I'm just going to give an example, and I'm going to say, like, Antonio, one of them, right? Like, Antonio has been in various injuries in the recent year, right? And a lot of those injuries had been decided by a computer. He gets to decide where he gets to travel, right? Before a minimum pay standard, one of the biggest issues that Antonio would mention is that when, he used to pick up food, sometimes the algorithms say you had to pick up food in an X zone, and it will tell you that, that the food is ready to pick up. And when you get there, one, he will find out that the restaurant has been closed for many months, right? And then when he doesn't pick up the food, he will be being penalized by giving a bad rating because he didn't complete that order, right? Without understanding that, first of all, the restaurant was closed. Second of all, it's not my fault that I didn't get to pick up that order. And that impacts, right, workers' ability to be able to continue to function. And sometimes we also have heard of stories, and I think Gustavo can tell you a little bit, right? Once when he was working with DoorDash, he got injured, right? And he immediately connected and texted to DoorDash that he got injured, and it was in the winter time, and the company cared more about whether the food was going to be able to arrive, right, rather than whether he was okay and whether he was able to get home safely. So it is these companies, it is these computers who are pretty much deciding how fast a worker gets to travel. It is a computer who is deciding how many hours this person gets to work. Is a computer deciding pretty much the working conditions of workers, and which has become one of the biggest challenges, right? Like how we force these companies to create mechanisms that gives a lot of more power and protections to workers who, at the end of the day, are the ones who are doing this job. And Deliveristas would say, it's not robots that are doing these jobs. There's human beings whose lives are at risk. And and whose families depend on. And I don't know if others want to add on to complete.
¿Me escuchan? ¿Me traduces? Tengo miedo. Ah.
¿Le ayudas? Sí, Luis.
Buenos días a todos. Mi nombre es Antonio Solís, soy deliverista desde hace ya 5 años. Trabajo para DoorDash, he trabajado para Grab, Uber, para todos, everything. Y bueno, como dijo Ligia, igual hemos pasado muchas cosas, ¿no? De los baños, que no nos dejan entrar a los baños. Entonces es algo inhumano por parte de los restaurantes que no nos dejan entrar a los baños. Y bueno, para eso está esa ley que se está impulsando y esperemos que los compañeros sigan reportando, ¿no? Que no les dejan entrar al baño. Y bueno, de una parte también estoy contento, ya que pues por fortuna muchos trabajadores han venido con nosotros a la organización de Workers Justice Project porque han sido víctimas de robo de salario por parte de DoorDash. Les hemos recuperado más de $100,000 junto con la organización, mis compañeros aquí presentes, y gracias a eso, pues muchos trabajadores van a tener la oportunidad de presentar acción diferida, que tenga una protección más aquí en la ciudad de Nueva York, y bueno, quería que supieran esto porque yo en lo particular, junto con mis compañeros, estamos felices por hacer esto posible, ya que varios trabajadores como yo, pues somos inmigrantes, muchos no tenemos papeles, y esta es una puerta que se nos abre a todos que hemos sido víctimas de DoorDash, ¿no? Que nos han robado el salario, nos han retenido el salario por mucho tiempo, 5 meses, hasta 1 año, y eso no es justo, y para eso estamos luchando, ¿no? Como organización y los Deliveristas Unidos. Gracias.
Thank you. Let me see if I remember everything. My name is Antonio Solís. I'm a delivery worker. I've been working for DoorDash and Grubhub for many years. I just want to tell you that our local law that we pass and we fight to get access to bathroom, it's important that the law was passed, but also enforcement of the law is very important. So we invite all the workers in the city of New York to send any complaint to the Department of Worker Protection for this case. We've been talking with workers on the street, and we know that a lot of people don't know, but also restaurant, they've been saying that law is not actually working. So it's important for us to enforce the law because it's our human right. And also, he want to say that he's very happy right now because we've been collecting cases of wage theft against DoorDash, and recently we got a letter of interest, and we're very close to apply for deferred action for workers because we know that a lot of people they've been getting retained their payments, and that's against we have a protection to get paid every week, and sometimes, especially DoorDash, they've been retaining incomes, and we know that we need to pay rent, we need to pay food, we need to pay all our expenses, but it seems like companies don't care about it. But the important thing is we are happy because we, as an immigrant workers in the city, most of us are undocumented. We have a path for worker permit, and that protection is going to allow us to keep fighting and these movements.
Yeah, one more final question. If you hit it.
Thank you so much. I also wanted to ask a little bit more about immigration status and how that impacts your work lives, whether that is misclassification or being having politicians be accountable, and what are some ways you foresee immigration reform kind of addressing some of these concerns.
Tú veías ya, William, ¿quieres responder eso? ¿O querías decir algo?
Responde yo.
Ok. ¿Quieres responder ahí?
Tengo miedo.
So, yeah, so part of our goal, and we're very supportive, and we haven't been able to be engaged at the federal level because of our capacity, but when there is organizing efforts at the national level to demand a humane pathway for immigration reform, we're going to stand with it, we're going to fight it, we're going to organize it. The Deliverista is just example. In 2020, most of the workers who turned into the streets to do this work were workers who lost their jobs. And most of those workers happen to be immigrant workers. Actually, like 95% of the workforce in New York City, particularly, it's immigrant workforce. Workers who come from all over the country doing this essential job that has kept every New Yorker safe and fed. During the pandemic, it continues to do so when we get hit by climate change crises across the city. But immigration, there's workers who are still fighting, right, to get immigration protections. And we know for these companies, like Uber, Grubhub, DoorDash, the weapon that they've been using to create fear has been the immigration crisis that we fixed. This broken system has kept workers with fear of coming forward. And this is why the deferred action protection has been so critical, because unfortunately there is really few options for workers to seek immigration protection, right? So many workers who have been here for more than a decade don't have a pathway for immigration reformed or a pathway to seek work authorization. And the few pathways that are available, it's almost non-existent for many workers. So we're relying a lot on deferred action to create that temporary pathway while we will continue to advocate. And we're very hopeful, right, under a new leadership. And this goes back of how critical these new elections are, because we know that if somebody gets elected, it will be detrimental to our communities, to the immigrant workforce, to everybody. So our lifeline and the lifeline of every worker, not only in the city of New York, but across the city, depends on these next elections, right? And we know that, you know, the most hopeful and like a candidate that we're hoping that this country will elect, it's Kamala Harris, right? Who seems to understand the importance of creating pathways and a real pathway for immigration reform. If not, we know that we'll be able to push her. So those are the things that we're fighting for, and hopefully be able, hopefully under, a better administration, we'll be able to push for these deferred action to be expanded and expanded to a more long-term pathway rather than just having 4 years of work authorization through this temporary protection.
Muy buenos días, mi nombre es William Medina, yo soy un inmigrante de Colombia. Quiero agradecer por habernos invitado el día de hoy y solamente quiero compartir un poco de mi experiencia personal como deliverista, porque creo que para todos nosotros siempre fue importante y siempre será la lucha, es algo a lo que siempre le hemos dado prioridad, pero todo esto no habría sido posible sin haber experienciado todas las cosas que nosotros como trabajadores pasamos en las calles. Cuando yo llegué a este país, creo que fui víctima de estas compañías creyendo que era una buena opción laboral, en donde yo leía en internet de esos falsos eslogan que dice que trabaje fácil, trabaje cuando tú quieras, y lo que me di cuenta fue que al pasar del tiempo veía cómo estas compañías se aprovechaban de nuestra forma de trabajar. En ese tiempo fue cuando yo conocí a Alejandro, y siempre mientras estuvimos trabajando hablábamos por el teléfono y hablábamos, compartíamos experiencias de cómo la compañía se aprovechaba de nosotros, de si algún día pudiéramos tal vez hacer algo para para cambiarlo y creo que después de un tiempo fue que conocimos a la organización, fue como conocí a Antonio y me habló acerca de la lucha, de cómo podíamos cambiar las cosas y mejorar nuestras condiciones laborales y creo que fue como una oportunidad que pues a mí como persona me dio la vida para no solamente cambiar mis condiciones laborales, sino también la de todos los trabajadores que están acá trabajando en la ciudad de Nueva York. Entonces, pues me siento muy orgulloso de representar a el proyecto de justicia laboral, me siento muy orgulloso de ser un líder, me siento orgulloso de pertenecer a un grupo de personas que están luchando no solamente por los latinos, sino por todas las personas que están alrededor del mundo que vinieron a Nueva York por un nuevo comienzo y por eso creo que es importante que todos entiendan cuál es el mensaje y cuál es nuestra visión al futuro.
My name is William Medina. I'm an immigrant from Colombia. I want to tell you a little bit about my experience working for the app companies. When I started working for them, I was like very excited when my first time before the pandemic, because like the companies were offering us this way of like working easy, anytime you want, it's good money, flexible. There's no any problem. But through the time, I was like noticing that not only me, but other comrades, they were having tons of problems. During that time, I met Alejandro. So constantly we were talking by phone, saying, this is unfair. This is not, we shouldn't be just keep working for these companies. How we can change this? And then I was lucky to meet Antonio, and he was already connected to the movement. And then we started learning that we had the capacity of changing this. So we call La Lucha, that means like we are fighting for better working conditions. So I feel very proud of be a delivery worker, a deliverista. We're very proud of being a member and leader in the Worker Justice Project. And also I feel very proud of like not only helping myself as a deliverista, but also like other thousands of workers who came to this country for a better opportunity. And not only Latinos, but also we're helping people who are coming from all over the planet to New York City to find a better life. So thank you very much for inviting us to talk with you, and we're going to keep fighting in this big fight.
Yeah, they both. Buenos días, mi nombre es Alejandro Grajales, soy deliverista en la ciudad de Nueva York por más de 9 años y líder y miembro del proyecto de justicia laboral. Quiero asegurarme de que ustedes entiendan un poco sobre la lucha que nosotros estamos teniendo. En este caso voy a hablar perdón, ¿cómo se dice? Lo de la... lo de los bloqueos y las desactivaciones injustas. Por ejemplo, en mi historia personal, les voy a poner el ejemplo de este domingo. Siempre he dicho, o sabemos todos que todos tenemos un corazón, pero cuando tú estás como peleando contra un computador, el computador no tiene corazón. Sí. Por ejemplo, este domingo estoy tratando de hacer mi trabajo lo mejor que puedo, como miles de trabajadores acá. Fui a llevar una orden a Roosevelt Island. Para los que no saben, la única forma de entrar allá en vehículo es cruzando un puente. Lastimosamente este domingo el puente estaba levantado porque iban a pasar 2 botes. Tuve que esperar media hora a que me volvieran a bajar el puente. Sé los riesgos que tengo para los bloqueos y las desactivaciones. Le escribí al cliente, él entendió, porque estoy tarde. Le escribí a Customer Service, esa persona también entiende. Entregué la orden y luego de entregar la orden me pusieron una violación porque me demoré demasiado. ¿Por qué? Porque las calificaciones las hace un robot. Aunque las personas entendieron, el robot no entiende por qué. Y ese es el problema que tenemos todos los trabajadores todos los días. Gracias.
Sí. My name is Alejandro Gajales. I'm also an immigrant from Colombia. I've been working for app companies for 9 years. And I want to tell you a story about something that we live like every day in the city of New York, our relationship with a robot, a computer, not an employer, like a human employer. So what happened is that this weekend I went to deliver an order in Roosevelt Island. So the only way to get there is like crossing a bridge. But the bridge was open. You know, there's a few boats were going. So he was waiting for 30 minutes to deliver the order. But he communicated with the client, and the client was like, no worries, I can wait. He communicated with customer service, and they say, okay, we understand. But then when he delivered the food, client was happy. A minute later, he was penalized because he was late delivering that order. So that's our relationship with somebody, with a computer, who is like rating us without any capacity for us to appeal or telling this story, a human story, right? And also it's related with the infrastructure that we are living in a complex city, right? So that's what thousands of us are communicating with somebody who doesn't have a heart, right? We have heart, soul, but the computer is just giving us orders and rating us in a very complex kind of work.
Thank you all, and thank you both for joining us, and thank you for sharing, and thank you all for spending the morning with us here at CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies. I think we have a little bit of food and coffee still left, so feel free to chat and stay a little bit. And I just want to make 2 announcements for upcoming events that we have. This Friday, we'll have a lunchtime event. Lunch will be provided. It'll be in the same space. And it's Unions and Feminist Worker Organizing in Puerto Rico. And we'll have Maria del Mar Rosa Rodriguez, who is the president of the Professors Union in Puerto Rico, joining us for the day. And then at the end of October, we're starting a series that will do a program this semester, one next semester, and then hopefully a large program in the fall of 2025 around AI, big tech, and labor. And so September 30th at lunchtime, we'll be joined, October 30th, we'll be joined by leading labor journalists, tech and labor journalists. And this is in partnership with the New Labor Forum, which is our labor journal here at CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies. So thank you all for being here with us today.
There's nothing funny, but